My name is Ellen L. Loya, and I'm 24 years old. After my parents bought my younger sister a car, she immediately got drunk, crashed it, and then tried to make me pay for it. When I refused, she smashed the car with my old baseball bat and tried to frame me for insurance fraud. And the sickest part is, none of that even surprised me, because I had been getting the absolute worst end of the deal in my family for as long as I could remember. My younger sister, Trista Loya, 21, was the golden child. She could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. The favoritism in our house was so obvious it would have embarrassed even a sitcom writer. I'm not exaggerating. It was the kind of imbalance that made you question your own memory, your own value, your own place in the family, until one day you realized you were not imagining any of it. You were just the one person who was never meant to win. Since I turned 18, I had been forced to pay $400 a month to live at home. Yes, really, $400 to live in the same house I grew up in a bedroom that hadn't been updated since I was 12. Meanwhile, Trista lived there for free, ate whatever she wanted, used every utility in the house, and acted like she owned the place. Every time I dared to point out how insane that was, my parents hit me with the same tired line. Our house, our rules. It was the kind of sentence people use when they know they have no real explanation, only power. And that was the pattern in our family. I was expected to earn everything. Trista was expected to enjoy everything. When I was in high school, I had to maintain a 3.8 GPA while working weekends at a local hardware store. I wasn't allowed to go to parties because, according to my parents, I needed to stay focused on my future. Trista barely dragged herself through her classes, never kept a job, and still got to go out every weekend because she was being social and needed to enjoy her youth. My accomplishments were treated like obligations I had merely fulfilled. Hers were treated like miracles. I would bring home straight A's and get a distracted good job. Trista would pass a class by the skin of her teeth, and my mother would post about how proud she was on Facebook, like Trista had been nominated for a Nobel Prize. By the time I was 24, I was working 40-plus hours a week at a soul-crushing corporate job, saving every dollar I could so I could finally get out. My plan was simple. Save enough for a decent apartment, first month's rent, last month's rent, and maybe enough left over to buy myself the kind of peace people from healthy families take for granted. But every time I got close, some mysterious family emergency appeared, and somehow I was always the one expected to help. Not Trista, never Trista. The person with no rent, no real bills, and endless chances was somehow always the one who needed protecting. I graduated college 3 years ago. I worked part-time while carrying a full course load, graduated with honors, and had a job lined up within 2 weeks. My reward was a half-hearted congratulations text and a $50 Applebee's gift card. No dinner, no celebration, no moment where anyone looked at me with pride in their eyes. Just a cheap gift card and the unspoken message that now I could continue paying rent on time. Last month, Trista finally graduated with a 2.4 GPA after 6 years of what I can only describe as advanced partying with occasional homework. She changed her major 3 times, failed multiple classes, and treated college like an extended social event that sometimes interrupted her sleep schedule. And what did my parents do to celebrate her mediocre finish line? They bought her a Tesla Model 3 Performance, not the base model, not something practical, the full version. White paint, premium sound, all the bells and whistles. A car worth more than anything anyone in my family had ever even considered giving me. I still remember the day they gave it to her. We were all standing in the driveway when my father handed Trista a small box. Inside were the keys. Across the street sat the Tesla, spotless and gleaming like it had been dropped there from another universe. Trista started screaming, jumping up and down like she had won the lottery, while my mother snapped what felt like 500 pictures for social media. The whole thing had this surreal glow to it, like I was standing outside my own life watching someone else's family celebrate a daughter they actually wanted. Then my dad noticed my face and said, "Don't be jealous. Your sister deserves this after working so hard." Working hard at what? That question just burned in my throat. When I pointed out that I had graduated in 4 years with honors while working and got basically nothing, my mom had the nerve to tell me, "Well, college was easier for you." Trista really struggled. That was the thing about my mother. She could take someone else's laziness and dress it up as fragility. She could take my discipline and reduce it to convenience. In her version of the world, Trista was always brave for surviving the disasters she created, and I was always ungrateful for noticing them. From the second Trista got that Tesla, it became her entire personality. I'm serious. She could not go 5 minutes without mentioning her car, posting the dashboard, filming herself in the driver's seat, or talking about features she did not understand. The Tesla wasn't transportation to her. It was proof. Proof that she mattered more. Proof that my parents would always catch her. Proof that consequences were for other people. Every night she came home late from whatever bar or party she had been at and tore through the driveway like a maniac, flooring the acceleration back and forth, making that electric whirring noise sound somehow arrogant. She woke up the whole neighborhood and laughed about it like everybody else's sleep was a joke. She drove like she was auditioning for some ridiculous streaming reboot of a street racing movie. Residential streets, parking lots, tight corners, sudden bursts of speed. She even filmed those idiotic videos where people pretended to trust the car more than their own judgment. And every time I said something, every time I pointed out that maybe treating public roads like her personal playground was not the best idea, Trista would smirk and tell me to stop being such a buzzkill. My parents were worse. They acted like I was bitter, dramatic, incapable of just being happy for my sister. My mother once actually said, "You're just jealous. You don't have friends who want to have fun with you." That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I watched Trista drive drunk. More than once. I offered to pick her up. I offered to call her an Uber. I told her I would come get her no matter what time it was. She always waved me off with the same smug confidence. The car practically drives itself, as if autopilot could cancel alcohol, as if technology could erase stupidity. Her friends were just as bad. They packed into that car, wasted, laughing, filming, hyping each other up, talking about joy rides like they were immortal. I warned them. I warned my parents. I warned everybody. I told them something bad was going to happen. Not maybe. Not someday in the distant future. Soon. You can only play chicken with reality for so long before reality stops flinching. But nobody listened, because nobody ever listened when the warning came from me. With every passing day, Trista got more reckless. The speeds got higher, the videos got dumber, the confidence got uglier. I started to feel this hard knot in my stomach every time I heard the Tesla pull out of the driveway after dark. It was not a question of if something would happen. It was when. And what terrified me most was not just the thought that Trista would get herself hurt. It was the deeper, colder certainty underneath it. When it happened, somehow, some way, my family would still try to make it my problem. I didn't know exactly how yet. I only knew the rhythm of that house too well. In my family, disaster never stayed where it belonged. It rolled downhill until it landed at my feet. And Trista kept driving faster, laughing louder, and acting like nothing in the world could touch her. The inevitable happened on a Thursday night. I was in my room, half buried in spreadsheets for work, trying to finish something before morning, when I heard my parents' bedroom door slam open around 3 a.m. It was not the normal sound of somebody getting water or wandering to the bathroom half asleep. It was sharp, panicked, the kind of sound that pulls you upright before your brain even catches up. Then came frantic whispering in the hallway, my mother's voice thin and shaky, my father's voice clipped and furious, followed by the front door opening and closing so fast it practically echoed through the house. A second later, I heard my dad's car start and tear out of the driveway. I stepped into the hall and went downstairs. My mother was standing in the kitchen in her robe, one hand pressed against the counter like she needed it to stay upright. She looked pale, almost gray, like somebody had sucked all the color out of her face. "What happened?" I asked. She didn't look at me right away. "Your sister had a little accident with the Tesla. Your dad went to pick her up." A little accident. That was family code. It never meant little. It meant catastrophic thing we are already trying to minimize before anyone asks questions. It meant broken, bleeding, expensive, illegal, or all four. It meant the cover story was already forming before the facts had even settled. I stood there staring at her. Was she drinking? My mother finally looked at me then, and it was not fear in her eyes. It was irritation. "Ellen, not now." That told me everything. I went back to the front window and waited. Around 4:30, my father's car finally pulled into the driveway. The porch light caught them as they got out, and even from inside the house I could tell it was bad. My dad was practically dragging Trista up the walkway. She could barely walk. One of her shoes was missing. There was dried blood on her forehead, and her mascara had streaked down her face in dirty black lines. She was slurring loudly about a tree coming out of nowhere, while my dad hissed at her to shut up. My mother rushed to open the door before they reached it, not with the alarm of parents whose daughter had just endangered herself and everyone else on the road, but with the urgency of people trying to get a mess off the lawn before the neighbors saw. By some miracle, Trista was not seriously hurt. A cut on her forehead, bruises from the airbag, probably a pounding hangover waiting for her in the morning. My parents helped her upstairs like she was a child who had fallen asleep in the car after a birthday party instead of a grown woman who had gotten drunk and wrapped a $60,000 vehicle around a tree. I did not get the full story until the next morning, and even then, I only got it in fragments because nobody sat me down and told me the truth. Truth in my house was something you had to collect from cracks in doors and whispered phone calls and the parts people forgot to hide. Trista had been at a bar called the Rusty Nail with some of her equally brilliant friends. She got wasted. Then she decided driving was somehow still a great idea. One of those friends had apparently filmed her doing shots and twirling the Tesla key around her finger like she was in a music video. On the way home, she took a corner too fast, lost control, jumped the curb, and drove straight into a massive oak tree in front of somebody's house. My father got there before the police ever officially entered the story. How he pulled that off, I still do not know. According to the whispered call my mother made to my aunt that morning, which I overheard from the hallway because nobody in my family had ever mastered the art of guilt without volume, my father had taken care of it with the homeowners. I have no idea what he promised them. Money, probably. My father's version of conflict resolution has always been cash and arrogance in equal measure. Whatever happened, the Tesla was towed to our garage instead of sitting in an impound lot where it belonged, and no officer showed up at our door that day. When I saw the car in daylight, I just stood there for a second and stared. The front end was destroyed, completely caved in. The hood looked like somebody had folded it with their bare hands. Both airbags had deployed, leaving that strange, chalky residue all over the interior. The windshield was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and one of the front wheels sat at an angle no wheel should ever sit at unless the rest of the car is preparing for a funeral. It was not damaged, it was ruined. A white luxury car turned into a monument to stupidity. And even standing there, looking at the wreck I had predicted over and over again, I could already feel something darker underneath my anger. Not relief that no one had died. Not even just fury that my family had ignored every warning I gave. It was that familiar cold instinct I had learned to trust over the years. The sense that this would not end with Trista facing what she had done. Somehow the weight of it would be redirected. Toward me, it always was. 2 days later, my parents called a family meeting in the living room. There has never been a family meeting in history that delivered good news. No one gathers everybody together with solemn faces to announce a surprise vacation or free money. Family meetings are where disappointment dresses itself up as responsibility, where the person who caused the problem gets protected, and the person who saw it coming gets punished for being right. I walked in and saw the setup immediately. My parents were on the couch wearing those serious, burdened expressions they use when they are about to say something completely unreasonable and want to make it sound noble. Trista was sprawled in the armchair, scrolling through her phone like the destruction of her car was an annoying scheduling conflict. The bruise on her face had turned a dramatic yellow-purple that, honestly, gave her more character than she usually had. My father cleared his throat. "Ellen, we've looked into the damage to Trista's car." He said it like the Tesla had developed a cough. "The insurance won't cover it because—" He trailed off, suddenly uncomfortable. "Because she was driving drunk," I finished for him. My mother shot me a look so sharp it could have cut glass. "Don't be dramatic. She had only had a few drinks." A few drinks. Right. Just enough to come home, barely able to walk, bleeding from the forehead, and ram a car into a tree. In my mother's world, anything short of actual unconsciousness qualified as a few. My father pressed on as if I had not spoken. "The point is, repairs are going to cost around $18,000, and we think it's only fair that we all chip in as a family." I actually laughed. It just came out before I could stop it. A short, stunned sound because for one glorious second I thought this had to be a joke, but nobody else laughed. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's face pinched with offense. Trista did not even look up from her phone. They were serious. "You want me to help pay to repair a car I do not own, do not drive, and that was wrecked because she got drunk and crashed it?" I asked. I repeated it slowly because I needed to hear it out loud to make sure I was not hallucinating from prolonged exposure to insanity. We're a family, my mother said, as though that explained anything. And you're the only one with significant savings right now. There it was. That was the real reason for the meeting. Not accountability, not problem solving. They knew I had been saving to move out, and they saw my savings the way they saw everything else about me. Not as mine, not as something I had worked for. Just as a reserve they could tap when Trista's life exploded again. My future was simply a fund for her emergencies. How much are you expecting me to chip in? I asked, already knowing the answer would be obscene. My father at least had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Your mother and I can put in about $3,000 from our emergency fund. Trista has around $500 saved. Of course she did. $500 to her name despite never paying rent, never paying real bills, never being asked to carry the kind of weight I had carried since I was 18. So you want me to cover the other $14,500, I said. We can figure out a payment plan, my father said quickly. Maybe $1,000 a month until it's paid off. Trista finally looked up from her phone. It's not like you need some fancy apartment anyway. And that was it. That was the moment something in me went still. Not loud, not dramatic, just still. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at Trista sitting there with a bruised face and a smug mouth, speaking as if the years I had spent saving to escape this house were nothing more than an inconvenience to her. And I realized with perfect clarity that if I gave in now, I would never get out. Not really. They would keep finding reasons to drain me until there was nothing left but obligation and resentment and a life built around cleaning up after people who despised me for noticing their mess. I'm not giving you a single cent, I said. Silence. The kind of silence that changes the air in a room. My mother blinked first, like she genuinely had not understood the sentence. My father leaned forward. Excuse me. You heard me, I said. I was calm, which somehow made them angrier. Trista drove drunk. She crashed the car. She should be grateful she is not in jail right now. This is her problem, not mine. My mother looked at me like I had slapped her. After everything we've done for you. That line again. That eternal, shapeless debt I was apparently supposed to carry forever. I turned to her. What exactly have you done for me? Made me pay rent while she lives here for free. Ignored everything I worked for while rewarding her for doing the bare minimum. Bought her a Tesla while I drive a car older than her driver's license. Please explain what part of that means I owe you $14,000 for her drunk driving accident. My father's face went red. You will contribute to fixing your sister's car. End of discussion. I stood up. I surprised even myself with how steady I felt. No, I said, I won't. End of my discussion. For a second, nobody moved. They were so used to me being the responsible one, the one who absorbed the pressure, the one who made sacrifices because somebody had to act like an adult in that house, that they genuinely did not know what to do with a version of me that refused. You're being selfish, my mother said finally, reaching for the sharpest weapon in her emotional toolbox. No, I said, I'm being realistic. Trista chose to drive drunk. She chose to crash the car. For once in her life, she can deal with the consequences. Then I walked out. Behind me, I heard my mother call my name in that furious, wounded tone she used when guilt was not landing the way she wanted. I heard my father bark at me to come back and discuss this like adults, which would have been funny if it were not so pathetic. The irony of them suddenly wanting an adult conversation only after their demand had been rejected was almost impressive. I made it halfway up the stairs before I heard Trista ask from the living room, "So what? Does this mean I'm not getting the car fixed?" Even then, even after all of it, that was still her first concern. Not the drunk driving, not the fact that she could have killed someone, not the money, not the lie my parents were trying to build around her, just the car, always whatever shiny thing was supposed to keep consequences away from her a little longer. I went into my room and shut the door. Then I locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the muffled shouting downstairs, my mother's voice rising, my father's footsteps thudding, the familiar storm building without me in the middle of it for once. And even though saying no felt like the first honest breath I had taken in years, I could not shake the feeling curling low in my stomach. Because in my family, no was never treated like a complete answer. It was treated like a challenge. And as the house settled into that ugly, tense silence that always came before something worse, I knew with absolute certainty that this was far from over. The next few days in the house felt like living inside a pressure cooker that someone had forgotten to turn off. My parents barely spoke to me unless it was to ask if I had reconsidered my decision. They said it like they were offering me a generous opportunity, not demanding that I hand over $14,000 to fix a car my sister destroyed while drunk. When I answered the same way every time, with a calm and very final no, the atmosphere grew colder. Doors slammed more often. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. My mom developed this passive-aggressive habit of talking about me in the third person while I was literally sitting 10 feet away from her. "Some people just don't understand family loyalty," she would say loudly while washing dishes, even though I was sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. It was subtle in the way a foghorn is subtle. Meanwhile, I kept noticing little things that made the situation feel stranger and stranger. Papers spread across the kitchen table that disappeared when I walked in. Quiet conversations between my parents late at night. My dad spending long stretches on the phone in his office using his professional voice, the one he used when he was trying very hard to sound reasonable while doing something shady. Friday evening, I came home from work and caught part of one of those calls. My dad was in the kitchen with the phone pressed between his shoulder and ear, flipping through some documents. "Yes, comprehensive coverage," he was saying. "And if it were, hypothetically, a vandalism situation, what would the policy look like then?" Vandalism. That word hung in their air for a second before he noticed me standing in the doorway. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately walked out of the room, continuing the conversation in his office with the door shut. I stood there for a moment thinking about it. Vandalism. Because last time I checked, driving drunk into a tree was not considered vandalism unless the tree had filed a police report. I figured they were grasping at straws, trying to trick the insurance company into paying. That was between them and the insurance investigators. Not my circus, not my monkeys. At least that's what I thought. Saturday morning started with a noise that ripped me out of sleep like somebody had dropped a metal dumpster outside my window. A loud, violent clang. Then another. Then another. I rolled over, confused and half asleep, staring at the ceiling. For a second, it sounded like someone beating the hell out of a trash can with a hammer. Then it stopped. I got up, walked to my window, and looked out over the driveway. Nothing looked unusual. The garage door was closed. The street was quiet. No movement anywhere. I rubbed my face, assumed it must have been the garbage collectors doing their thing early, and went back to bed. About an hour later, chaos exploded in the garage. I woke up to shouting, not normal arguing. Full volume, panicked yelling that echoed through the house. My father's voice, my mother's voice, and Trista's voice layered over both of them. I threw on a pair of sweats and ran downstairs. The garage door was open. My parents were standing inside, and Trista was standing right in front of the Tesla. For a second, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. The car had already been wrecked from the crash. The smashed front end, the cracked windshield, the bent wheel. I had seen that. But now it looked like something out of a demolition derby. Every window in the car had been shattered. The windshield was completely destroyed. The doors were dented so deeply they looked like someone had attacked them with a sledgehammer. The side mirrors were hanging by wires. One headlight had been ripped completely out of the frame. The hood looked like it had been punched repeatedly by someone with superhuman strength. It was not just damaged anymore. It was annihilated. What the hell happened? I asked, genuinely confused. Trista spun around so fast it was almost theatrical. "You don't know?" she snapped. I stared at her. "Know what?" "You did this." For a second, I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "I was asleep all night," I said. "Why would I smash your car?" My father stepped forward, holding something in his hand. A baseball bat. My baseball bat. The one from high school that had been sitting in the back of my closet for years. He held it up like it was evidence in a courtroom. "Then why was this found in the bushes outside the garage?" he asked. My stomach dropped. I hadn't touched that bat in months. It had been buried under old sports gear in the back of my closet. "I have no idea," I said. "Don't lie to us," my mother snapped. I looked from her to the bat to the car, and something cold began sliding into place in my mind. My dad continued speaking. "We've already contacted the insurance company," he said smugly. "They're sending an investigator Monday morning. We told them someone vandalized the car out of anger." Vandalized. And just like that, the entire picture snapped into focus. The drunk driving crash had voided the insurance claim. But vandalism? That might be covered. And if the vandal happened to be the angry sister who refused to pay $14,000? Well, that would solve multiple problems at once. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Trista. She was trying very hard not to smile. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "You took my bat, smashed up your already wrecked car, and planted the bat outside so it looks like I did it." She shrugged. "Who do you think they're going to believe?" she said. The words landed like ice water. My parents stood behind her with their arms crossed. A perfect little united front. They had already decided. It didn't matter that this was literally insurance fraud. It didn't matter that they were trying to frame their own daughter for a crime. All that mattered was protecting their golden child. "This is insane," I said. "You know I didn't touch the car." My mother scoffed. "We heard you leave your room around 2 in the morning." I raised an eyebrow. "No, you didn't." "Maybe the neighbor's security cameras caught you," she added quickly. That was interesting, because our neighbors did not have cameras pointed at our driveway. They were bluffing, which meant one thing. They knew exactly what had happened. "Let me make sure I understand this," I said slowly. "You want me to either pay $14,000 for repairs to a car I don't own, or you're going to accuse me of vandalizing it so you can commit insurance fraud." My dad's face turned red. "Nobody is accusing anyone. We know you did this because you're angry." I stared at him for a long moment. Then I turned and walked back into the house without another word. There was no point arguing. They had already written their story. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door and sat down on the edge of my bed. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the realization that things had just crossed a line I had never imagined my family would cross. They were willing to frame me, not just guilt-trip me, not just pressure me, frame me. I grabbed my phone and stared at it for a minute before dialing my boss. "I need Monday off," I said when he answered. "Emergency." Because there was no way I was letting my parents handle that insurance investigation without being there. If they were willing to go this far already, I had no idea what they might say next. After I hung up, I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. My parents had just shown me something about them that I could never unsee. How far they were willing to go to protect Trista. And the more I thought about it, the worse the realization became. Because if they were willing to frame me now, what had they already covered up for her in the past? Monday morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension that seemed to cling to every wall in the house. Nobody spoke much at breakfast. My mother moved around the kitchen with stiff, angry movements, slamming cabinets harder than necessary. My father sat at the table, reading emails on his phone like everything was completely normal. Trista lounged on the couch, scrolling through social media, occasionally touching the fading bruise on her forehead, like it was a prop she could use for sympathy. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. The insurance investigator had arrived. His name was Mac, and he looked exactly like the kind of man who had spent years listening to people lie for a living. Mid-40s maybe, wrinkled button-down shirt, khaki pants, tablet under one arm, and a small camera hanging from a strap around his neck. He greeted everyone politely, but didn't waste any time with small talk. He walked straight to the garage. My father tried to convince me to go to work before Mac arrived. He said they would handle everything and that I didn't need to be involved. But I just stood there looking at him until he stopped talking. Funny how quickly his authority evaporated when I didn't automatically obey. So I stayed. Mac spent nearly 20 minutes examining the Tesla. He crouched down near the smashed front end, took photographs of the deployed airbags, then slowly walked around the rest of the vehicle, capturing every dent and broken window. I noticed the way he lingered between two sections of damage, comparing them carefully. Even without being an expert, it was obvious that the damage had come from two completely different events. The crushed front end from the crash, the smashed windows and doors from the bat. After finishing his inspection, Mac asked if he could speak with each of us separately. My parents went first. They insisted on going together, which already made the entire situation suspicious. They sat with him at the kitchen table for about 30 minutes while I waited in the living room. I could hear bits and pieces of the conversation through the wall. My mother's voice sounded soft and emotional, like she was telling a tragic story. My father spoke calmly, slowly, the way he did when he was trying to sound trustworthy. Then it was Trista's turn. Her interview lasted maybe 15 minutes. At one point, I heard her voice get louder, almost defensive, like she was trying to emphasize how upset she was. It sounded less like grief and more like performance. Finally, Matt called me in. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table. His laptop was open, several pages of notes spread out beside it. He looked up at me and asked calmly, "Can you tell me where you were Friday night and early Saturday morning?" I told him the truth. "I came home from work around 6, I said. Made a sandwich, played Xbox for a few hours, and went to bed around 11. I didn't leave my room until I heard my family yelling in the garage the next morning." Mac nodded and typed something into his laptop. Then he asked the question directly. "Did you have anything to do with the damage to this vehicle?" "No," I said firmly. "But there's something you should know that they probably didn't tell you." That got his attention. He leaned back slightly. "What's that?" I explained everything. The Tesla had been a graduation gift for Trista. I told him how she had been driving recklessly since the day she got it. The speeding, the late nights, the drinking, the videos she filmed with her friends. Then I described the crash, how she had wrapped the car around a tree while drunk, how my father had rushed out in the middle of the night, how the car had been towed into our garage afterward. Mac's eyebrows lifted slightly. The airbags were already deployed from that crash, I said. The front end damage came from hitting the tree. The smashed windows and doors happened later. I paused, then continued. And the vandalism happened the morning after my parents asked me to pay $14,000 for repairs, and I refused. Mac didn't interrupt. He just kept writing. I told him about the family meeting, the demand for money, the argument, then the sudden discovery that the car had been smashed again with my baseball bat conveniently found outside. When I finished, Mac sat quietly for a moment. Then he asked, "Can anyone confirm you were in your room all night?" And not directly, I admitted, but I ordered pizza around 9:30 Friday night, and I was playing Xbox Live with friends until about 11. They can confirm I was online. He typed more notes. Then he asked something that caught me off guard. "Do any of your neighbors have security cameras?" "Not that would see our driveway," I said. "The Johnsons across the street have a doorbell camera, but it only shows their porch." Mac nodded and wrote something else down. After a few more routine questions, he thanked me for my time and closed his laptop. As we walked back into the living room, I could feel my parents' eyes burning into the back of my head. They knew immediately that I hadn't followed their script. Mac shook everyone's hands politely and left. The moment the front door closed behind him, the explosion started. "How could you do that?" my mother cried, her voice cracking like I had betrayed the entire family. "You told him about the crash?" my father demanded. "Yes," I said calmly. Trista rolled her eyes from the couch. You're literally trying to ruin my life over one mistake," she said. "One mistake. Drunk driving. Insurance fraud. Framing your own sister." Apparently all of that counted as a single tiny mistake. My father stepped closer to me, his face red with anger. You better call that investigator back and fix this," he snapped. "If you know what's good for you." I didn't respond. I just walked upstairs and locked my door. For the next 2 days, I avoided them as much as possible. I went to work, came home, stayed in my room, and ordered food instead of eating in the kitchen. The house felt like enemy territory. Then on Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Mac from State Farm Insurance. Could you meet me on Main Street at 4 p.m. today? I have some follow-up questions." I texted back immediately. "I'll be there." I didn't tell my parents where I was going. After work, I drove straight to the Starbucks on Main Street. Mac was already there, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and several documents spread out in front of him. When I walked in, he raised his hand slightly to signal me over. I sat down across from him. "I wanted to speak with you somewhere away from your family," he said quietly. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "We've uncovered some inconsistencies in the claim." Then he turned his tablet toward me. Security footage. A wide-angle camera from a house 2 doors down the street. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. The video showed someone walking into the driveway. Clear as day. Trista. She was holding my baseball bat. The footage showed her walking up to the already wrecked Tesla and methodically smashing every window. The windshield, the side mirrors, the doors, even ripping off a headlight. She wasn't angry or frantic. She was calm, deliberate, staging the entire scene. Mac watched my reaction carefully. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, he said quietly, "and this is one of the dumbest frame jobs I've ever seen." Then he added the sentence that changed everything. "We've already referred the case to our fraud department." My heart pounded. "And the police?" I asked. Mac nodded. "They're involved now." He glanced toward the door. "They should be here in about 10 minutes. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the tablet. The video looped silently in front of me. Trista walking across the driveway in the middle of the night, my baseball bat resting casually in her hands. Then the first swing, glass exploding. Another swing, another. The calm, methodical destruction of her own car, like she was checking items off a list. It was almost surreal. For years I had suspected the favoritism in my family was bad. I had felt it in 1,000 little moments. But seeing that footage made something crystal clear. This was not just favoritism anymore. This was criminal. Matt closed the video and looked at me with a professional but sympathetic expression. "I've already sent the footage to our fraud department," he said, "and I contacted the local police. Given what we found, they'll want statements." Right on cue, the door of the cafe opened. A police officer stepped inside. She was in uniform, early 30s maybe, calm eyes scanning the room before she walked toward our table. Max stood and introduced us. "Officer Rivera, this is Ellen L. Loya." She shook my hand politely and sat down. "I'm going to ask you a few questions about what happened," she said, "and I'll show you the footage as well." She played the video again. Seeing it the second time felt even heavier. There was no ambiguity, no confusion, just Trista, alone in the driveway, smashing the car piece by piece. Officer Rivera paused the video and turned to me. "Your sister attempted to stage vandalism to support a fraudulent insurance claim," she said calmly. "In addition to that, the evidence suggests she attempted to frame you." I nodded slowly. The word sounded strange out loud, even though I had already known the truth. She continued. "The district attorney will decide whether to pursue insurance fraud charges. But regarding the false report and the attempt to blame you for the vandalism, that part involves you directly." She folded her hands on the table. "Do you want to press charges against your sister?" The question hung in the air. For the first time that entire week, nobody was shouting. Nobody was manipulating the situation. Nobody was trying to twist the story. It was just a simple choice. Yes or no. And suddenly, all the years leading up to this moment started replaying in my mind like scenes from a movie. The rent I had been forced to pay since I was 18. The nights working late while Trista partied. The graduation I earned that nobody celebrated. The Tesla they bought her. The family meeting where they demanded my savings. The smashed car. The planted bat. The way my parents stood behind her while she smirked at me. I realized something in that moment. If I said no, nothing would change. They would continue protecting her. She would continue hurting people, and I would continue being the person who absorbed the consequences. I looked Officer Rivera in the eye. "Yes," I said. No hesitation. No long speech. Just a simple yes. She nodded and wrote something in her notebook. "All right," she said. "We'll need you to come to the station later this evening to give a formal statement." We scheduled the appointment for 6 o'clock. When the meeting ended, I thanked Max sincerely. If he had not done the extra work searching for security footage, the entire plan might have succeeded. I walked out of the cafe feeling like the ground under my life had shifted, because now the truth was out, and once the truth started moving, it would not stop. I drove home around 5 o'clock to grab a few things before heading to the police station. As I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. A police cruiser was already parked outside. Officer Rivera clearly had not wasted any time. When I walked into the house, the atmosphere was explosive. My mother was pacing the living room, crying loudly. My father stood near the kitchen, yelling into his phone about misunderstandings and family matters. Trista sat on the couch looking pale for the first time since this whole situation began. The smug confidence was gone. My mom rushed toward me the second she saw me. "What have you done?" she cried. "The police were just here. They're saying Trista could be charged with fraud." "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "Trista did that herself when she tried to frame me." My father hung up his call and stormed toward me. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "We can handle this as a family. You need to call them back and tell them you're not pressing charges." "No." The word came out quietly, but it hit the room like a bomb. My father's eyes widened slightly. "You're done covering for her?" he said incredulously. "Yes," I said. "I'm done being the fall guy." The meltdown that followed was exactly what you would expect. My mother switched between crying and guilt-tripping me. My father alternated between threats and offers of financial help if I would just fix the situation. Even Trista attempted an apology, but it sounded hollow, like someone reading lines from a script. "I'm sorry," she muttered at one point. "Jail is scary, Ellen. Not sorry for trying to ruin my life. Sorry for getting caught." At 5:45, I went upstairs. Because suddenly something was very clear. I was not coming back to this house after tonight. I packed a small duffel bag. Clothes, my laptop, my passport, and important documents. When I came back downstairs with the bag over my shoulder, my parents noticed immediately. "Where do you think you're going?" my father demanded. "I'm going to the police station," I said. "After that, I'm staying with a friend for a while." My mother began crying harder. "You can't leave. We need to handle this as a family." I looked at her calmly. "We stopped being a functional family a long time ago." My father moved in front of the door, blocking it. "If you walk out that door and go through with this," he said coldly, "don't bother coming back." The house went silent. "You'll no longer be welcome here if you do this to your sister." I met his eyes. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm not destroying the family. I'm just refusing to let the family destroy me anymore." Then I stepped around him, opened the door, and walked outside. He shouted something behind me about loyalty and ungrateful children. But I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I chose myself. And strangely enough, it felt like freedom. Giving my formal statement at the police station took a little over an hour. Officer Rivera walked me through everything again carefully. The timeline, the first crash, the family meeting, the vandalism, the security footage. Every detail had to be written down clearly, so there would be no confusion later. She explained the charges that were likely coming. Trista would be facing attempted insurance fraud, filing a false report, and potentially additional charges connected to the original DUI crash that my parents had tried so hard to hide. Apparently, the hospital had recorded her blood alcohol level that night when she was treated for the cut on her forehead. And once the investigation started digging, it did not take long for the truth to surface. "This might get messy," Officer Rivera warned gently as she finished writing. "Family cases usually do." She looked up at me. "Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." And that was that. When I left the station, my phone was already buzzing with calls and messages from my family. I didn't read any of them. I simply turned the phone off and drove across town. My boyfriend, Chris Moreno, was waiting on the porch of his apartment when I pulled up. He had 2 cold sodas in his hands and a bag of takeout food sitting on the step beside him. He didn't ask questions right away. He just grabbed my duffel bag, opened the door, and said, "Whatever happened, we'll figure it out." That moment hit me harder than anything that had happened that week, because this was what support actually felt like. No manipulation, no pressure, just someone standing next to you. I stayed with Chris for a few weeks while everything unfolded. During that time, the investigation moved quickly, much faster than anyone in my family expected. The evidence against Trista was overwhelming. The security footage, the insurance investigation, the hospital blood alcohol report, even some of the videos her friends had posted online showing her drinking that night before the crash. There was no real defense. A few months later, she accepted a plea deal. 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, a massive fine, and a 5-year suspension of her driver's license. The Tesla, of course, was totaled. Between the crash and the vandalism, there was nothing left worth repairing. The loan still existed, though, which meant my parents were now responsible for paying off a $60,000 car that no longer functioned. They weren't charged criminally, but they were hit with heavy financial penalties once the insurance company concluded they had tried to file a fraudulent claim. Between legal fees, fines, and the remaining car payments, the financial fallout was brutal. My father eventually lost his job when the story made its way through his workplace. Apparently, companies do not appreciate employees getting caught up in insurance fraud investigations. For the first time in my life, the consequences of Trista's actions were landing where they actually belonged. Meanwhile, my life began to change in ways I hadn't expected. After about 3 weeks, I found a small, 1-bedroom apartment of my own. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place where nobody slammed doors or demanded explanations about how I spent my money. Work improved, too. Without the constant chaos at home draining my energy, I started performing better. A few months later, I was promoted to a supervisory role. My boss even joked that I must have discovered some kind of secret productivity trick. In a way, I had. It's amazing what happens when your entire life is no longer built around surviving your family. I also started taking night classes toward an MBA, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the mental space for before. Chris stayed by my side through all of it. He never pushed for details when I didn't want to talk. He never treated my situation like gossip or entertainment. He just listened when I needed to vent and reminded me that what happened wasn't my fault. 6 months passed faster than I expected. Then one evening, my phone lit up with a message from a number I hadn't seen in months. My mother, "Ellen, we need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment before opening it. That was when the next chapter of the story began. Because apparently the consequences that finally landed on my family had created a new problem. And once again, they believed I was the solution. The first message came from my mother. "Ellen, we really need to talk. It's important." I stared at the text for a long time before responding. For 6 months, I had lived in peace. My small apartment was quiet. My life had structure. Work, classes, evenings with Chris. No shouting, no guilt trips, no chaos. The silence from my family had been almost therapeutic. But the messages kept coming. First my mother, then my father, then strangely enough, even Trista using her limited phone time from jail. All 3 of them had the same goal. They just delivered it differently. My mom tried guilt. "We're about to lose the house. After everything we've done for you, how can you abandon your family now?" My dad tried intimidation. "You owe this family. You need to step up and help fix this situation." Trista took a softer approach. "Jail has changed me, Ellen. I see things differently now. I'm really sorry. Could you maybe help with some commissary money?" That last message almost made me laugh. 6 months earlier, she had tried to frame me for a felony. Now she was asking for snack money. For a while, I ignored all of them. Then one evening, about a week later, there was a knock at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Chris was working late that night, so when I opened the door and saw my parents standing in the hallway, I froze. They looked different. Smaller. My father's suit jacket was wrinkled. My mother's hair looked thinner than I remembered. Both of them had that desperate expression people get when they've run out of options. "How did you find my address?" I asked. My father waved his hand vaguely. "Family connections." Of course. They stepped inside before I could say anything else. My mother sat down at the small kitchen table and immediately started crying. My father remained standing like he was trying to maintain some level of authority in a place where he clearly had none. They had prepared a speech. The house was being sold. Their accounts had been frozen during the investigation. The legal fees had drained their savings. My father had lost his job. My mother's anxiety was getting worse. They needed help. They needed money to transition while everything settled. "Please," my mother said through tears, "you're our daughter. We need you right now." I listened quietly while they spoke. For almost 10 minutes, they explained their situation, the stress, the pressure, the way everything had fallen apart since the case. It was an impressive performance. When they finally finished, the apartment fell silent. I looked at both of them for a moment. Then I asked one simple question. "Sorry," I said calmly. "I must have missed something in your explanation. Could you remind me which part of trying to frame me for insurance fraud means I should give you money?" My mother's face collapsed like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. My father opened his mouth, closed it again. For once in their lives, they had no script ready, because this wasn't their house anymore. They weren't controlling the conversation. They were standing in my doorway asking for help from the person they had tried to sacrifice. "I'll think about it," I said. Then I walked to the door and opened it. They left quietly. I closed the door behind them. I thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and sent a single message. "The answer is no. Please don't contact me again." The responses came quickly. My father sent angry messages about loyalty and family duty. My mother sent long emotional texts about forgiveness and second chances. Trista sent a short message promising she had changed. I blocked all 3 numbers. Some people might think that was harsh. Maybe it was. But after 24 years of being the scapegoat in my own family, I had finally learned something important. Being related by blood does not give someone the right to destroy your life. Family is supposed to protect you, support you, stand beside you when things get hard. For most of my life, I thought family meant obligation. But the night I left that house with a duffel bag, I discovered something different. Family can also mean the person waiting on a porch with 2 sodas and a bag of takeout. The person who says, "We'll figure it out," instead of "Fix this for us." Chris was sitting on my couch when I finished blocking the numbers. He looked up from the TV. "Everything okay?" I sat down beside him and exhaled slowly. "Yeah," I said. "For the first time in a long time, it really is. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is walk away from the people who raised you. But sometimes, walking away is the only way to finally move forward."